Hi, this presentation is going to walk through baking a recipe using the Schema.org Blueprints module for Drupal. My name is Jake Rockwitz. I want to make your life easier by solving complex problems with simple, well-thought-out solutions. You can find me at jrockwitz on the web, Drupal.org, Twitter. I want to level set and say the Schema.org Blueprints module can bake a recipe that has a perfect data structure, a pristine API, and great SEO. And that's the overall goal of the module, but we're focusing on recipes, those three things. So what is the Schema.org Blueprints module? Let's just start here. It's kind of a three-step process to say what is Schema.org. It is a collaborative community activity with a mission to create, maintain, and promote schemas for structured data on the internet, on web pages, and email messages, and beyond. Structured data means well-defined information. Some people say it's food for machines. And the idea here is it's a collaboration between Microsoft, Yahoo, and Google to define things so that when their search engines find a web page, they completely understand the information. So much so that if there was an event, they would know when the event is, what the date is, when it's repeating, if it's canceled, who the recommended audience is. Every piece of information is cleaner. With recipes, Google, if they find structured data, schema.org markup on your page, they will highlight the recipe in a carousel where they always will show an image, and they'll say if there's ratings and how long it takes to cook. It makes a big difference. It improves the user experience. It helps to promote information properly. So let's keep going. A Schema.org first approach leverages Schema.org as the foundation for building content models using structured data, which is API first, standardized, and universal. Most sites take a Schema.org last approach where they build their content models and then they apply Schema.org to those models. They basically shim it into that specification. I am recommending or thinking that we should try to start with Schema.org first because it's well-defined structured data. We don't have to reinvent the wheel for what a recipe is. And lots of organizations are doing this already. In our community with the Umami starter theme or starter distribution for just demoing Drupal, the recipe is based on Schema.org, not 100%. I'm going with 100%, and that's where we get into the Schema.org Blueprints module, which takes a Schema.org first approach to building content models and structured data in Drupal. You take the spec and you build your content from the spec. It's mapped to the spec one for one. Let's talk about recipes. So schema.org/recipe defines what a recipe is. You should go there. I'm only pulling the breadcrumbs on the top of the page, which shows a hierarchy where recipes, what defines a recipe? Well, a recipe is a how-to, a set of instructions that explain how to achieve a result by performing a sequence of steps. The how-to specs has, what are the tools? How long does it take? What's preparation time? Ultimately, these are creative works. Someone's creating this. So you have an author, an owner, lots of extra metadata around that. And then you have a thing. Everything comes from a thing. Things are very generic. It's just like there's a name, description, a URL to it. And this is an example of the JSON LD markup that would get Mom's world famous banana bread highlighted on a Google search result, and it's breaking down the ingredients, the nutrition information, which we're going to spend a little time on, prep time, and even what diet it's suitable for. Now, nutrition information, I'm highlighting that because it's a part of a recipe. So this description is actually inaccurate on schema.org. It says nutrition information about the recipe. Nutrition information has been updated to, it's a piece of data that can be used anywhere, so they're using it on menu items in schema.org. And it makes sense. If you had Mom's banana bread on your menu, you'd want to have the nutrition information associated with that menu item value and not a recipe for it. What nutrition information is a structured value. Structured values are used when the value of a property has more complex structure than simply being a textual value. Nutrition information is made up of a bunch of subproperties. The calories, the sodium content, the carbohydrates, the fats. And these are intangible. And for the Drupal community, intangible just means, I would say, it doesn't have a URL. You don't go to an intangible schema.org type. It's part of another type. So let's get into how to bake a recipe using the Schema.org Blueprints module. I'm going to do two approaches here. I'm going to use paragraphs, which is very common. Paragraphs enables the creation of paragraph entities. These are like components within a node. People are using it to build very complex pages, even layouts. In this case, we're just having nutrition information as a paragraph. And then I want to introduce you to Flex Field. It's a new module in the community, and it defines a Flex Field type that lets you create simple multi inline multiple value fields without having to use any references. And I'm going to do a demo. I'm going to switch over. This is a clean vanilla instance of Drupal. I'm logging in. And something to help out with this demo, and I'm really trying to get people familiar with the module. So what I'm going to do is go over to our recipe is going to have an image, and we have to map our Drupal entities schema.org type. So all I'm doing is a very quick thing to prevent a minor error that would be displayed, but I'm going down and saying just map. And you see when it's green, that means it knows the information. It's mapping one-to-one. We're not creating new fields. I hit save. So when we get to the recipe, we'll actually have an image of the recipe, which is very important. Now let's talk through and think about this. I'm creating the smaller parts of the recipe before I get to the bigger part, the recipe. So I'm going to go to paragraph types, and here we can add a paragraph type or schema.org type. And I'm going to hit add schema.org type. We get to see get a little starter page, and we're going to go to quick start, nutrition information. Here's our add paragraph type form. Now here are the properties. And it's finding everything's pretty much number values. Decimal it's a good starting point. You can change this to integers, floats, or whatever you want. This is actually configuration, so you could change how it even starts off, but I'm going to keep going. I do want to call out, just so you see, we're only showing map properties. If I hit show on mapped, we're going to see everything. And it's a lot about the inheritance. We're going to see what's coming from thing gives us an image. We don't really need an image for nutrition information, but it's available. I'm going to hit save. Now we have our nutrition information paragraph. We're going to go over to our content types. I kind of want to not jump too far ahead, but we're going to add a schema.org type. We're going to add a recipe. Because I checked this off, it kind of knows that I've been examining the properties. In this case, it's showing everything available. I'm going to click show unmapped. I'm going to hide the unmapped. And now you can see we get cooking method. If we go down to nutrition information, it automatically figured out that we have a paragraph, and that's the first recommended property. So if a field type, so it says, okay, you want paragraphs because you want nutrition information. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to hit save. Takes a second. This is generating an entire content type and all the fields, form modes, display modes associated with the recipe at once. And I can show that to you, but what I want to do is I'm going to go in and create a recipe using just the devel generate. It just saves a little time. I'm going to say recipe. I'm going to say I want one. I'm going to check these just to make it a little friendlier looking. Now we go over to content. And we got our one recipe using paragraphs for nutrition information. So when I scroll down, there's our nutrition information, nice and pretty. If I go over to here and hit edit, you get this nice form. You go down, there's a single paragraph. It's already configured to kind of figure that out, that you don't want multiple paragraphs. As a general rule, I'll throw out there that if you were doing, for example, like a recipe that had different ingredients, like if you use low-fat milk versus whole milk, the nutrition information would essentially change, and you might have multiple instances of nutrition information. And interestingly enough, it comes back to you'd have to name these. You'd have to say nutrition information with whole milk or with low-fat milk. I like digressing to that because it just shows you how well thought out schema.org is. We're going to keep going. So we're back here. And now let's just talk about, we have our content. And by the way, this goes back to, this is our data structure. And now we're going to talk about our SEO, which is at the bottom because it's going to show us the JSON LD for the recipe. And here it is. Here's our nice, clean nutrition information that's going out. I'm going to scroll back up. What I also want to show you, and I'm going to do it in a new tab, I'm going to go to structure, schema.org. And this is the configuration where it tracks everything that's going on. And we could look at the recipe API. And this is going to show you the big difference between paragraphs and flex field. So we're going to go down. I'm going to do a search. I'm going to do nutrition. And nutrition, it's a reference to a paragraph because it's an entity. That's just how JSON API has to do it. And if I go down to the bottom, we're going to get, here's our nutrition information and here's all the data. Front-end person has to get into a pattern of looking it up. Not a big deal because you got UUIDs. I'm going to keep this here. And now we're going to talk about flex field. First, we got to turn it on. And I'm going to go. I'm going to search for Flex. And we have it on, but I have a Flex field, a Schema.org Blueprints Flex field, which does like an integration. It's actually a good example of how to do integrating new field types. It's experimental. Everything in Schema.org Blueprints is experimental at this point. And now what we're going to do is go back to our content type, recipe. I'm going to go to Manage Fields. I'm going to delete this field. And we're going to basically, instead of starting over the recipe completely, I'm going to go to Schema.org. And now, one thing to say is we're updating an existing Schema.org type. Nothing will ever be added after you first create it. You have to explicitly say what new fields you want to add. So right now it's doing show on mapped. So you'd have to, you could, well, it's showing mapped. You could say show on mapped. I'm going to use the little filter here because it's a good tool. You hit nutrition. We have it. It's not enabled by default, so I'm going to go over to add. And flex field is coming up first. And if you look at the recommended, flex field was set. The actual Schema.org Blueprints flex field module is doing this. It's saying, you know what, we need to recommend a flex field over paragraphs because in that module we've said we want to use flex field for nutrition. I'm going to hit save. Now we have our nutrition information added. We can go over to fields, and I want to spend a second here and walk you through what flex field does. It creates these properties. So this is like a mini fields inside a field, or these are just properties, serving size, text. You can change it. Serving size is just text, but the other ones can be decimal values or floats, min, max. We're not trying to overdo it here. And we go to the storage. You can't change these, but, well, we haven't added data, so you can change these. Once you add data, you can't. But these are just properties on a field, which actually are just simple columns in the database, not new tables or new structured data or anything like not new data structures. They're added columns. It's important, and when we get to the API, you'll see how it's much simpler. Now I will go back to our recipe. We're going to have no nutrition information because we deleted the paragraph. So I'm actually just going to go right in, hit edit, go down. The UX is going to be very similar to what we saw before. I'm going to just use the number 23 a bunch of times. The module is doing a little extra. It's addressing flex field, doesn't support field prefixes and suffixes. It figures it out. It gets the unit. I'm going to hit save. I'm pretty sure we're going to get a quick little keywords thing because the taxonomy isn't set up fully. Not a big deal. It's from devel generate. Hit save. Go down, and we get our nice information, the property, nutrition. You can style this a little bit more. You can actually put it into a table. If we go to JSON LD, let's go. We get our set of nutrition information. Actually, in this case, we get our units added. Now, to emphasize the API difference, I'm going to go here. I have to take off. I'm doing an include on nutrition in the nutrition entity, which on the nutrition field, which pulls in the entity, which no longer exists. So I'm taking it out. Okay, so let's talk about the difference. This is a flex field generating an API, and what happens when you go to nutrition information is you get your data right here. It's not a reference, an entity reference to another entity that someone has to look up. It's right there. It's clean. Even just from a visual conceptual thing, it's much easier to understand flex field because you have to go here. You have to go be like, we go up here. You're just getting a reference, and then you got to go find the information. Here, the information's right there. It's simpler. It's faster because it's less looking up. It's quicker, less data. It's coming from a column on a table, not individual tables. Let's keep going. I hope I did a good job explaining that. And let's talk through pros and cons. Paragraphs. There are lots of ways to add entities to forms. Paragraphs is the most installed and popular way to do it. It's better supported than FlexField. You're talking the difference between hundreds of thousands and less than 1,000 installs. I think Paragraphs is well over 100,000. Paragraphs is more flexible because it's just entities and fields. That means you can do almost anything with that data. If you want your nutrition information to look like the code on a box, it's probably easier. But the cons, Paragraphs is more complex, more power. The APIs are more complex. It is slower. It always is slower to use entities over fields. Still, it's a tolerable performance hit, and the community has worked hard to make Paragraphs perform better. Flex fields, very easy to set up, Very simple. Less code to support. It's a simpler solution. It's actually easier to understand. Cons. There are no stable releases to FlexField. I think it's in beta. There could be one that's coming out. It supports only simple values. When you get into nested multiple values, that is just not supported. It's like name value pairs. If you have to get name value pairs anywhere, by the way, even outside schema.org blueprints, it's a great module for that. It is much faster performance. It's probably the fastest way to do name value pairs in an entity in Drupal. So I want to end with my problem statement or challenges. The schema.org blueprints module can bake a recipe that has a perfect data structure. Showed you 2 ways to do it. A pristine API. You can see the API just follows the schema.org spec word for word. The names, the documentation, which we're going to get into, is the spec, the descriptions. And you get great SEO because you've got JSON LD that describes a recipe. Google will use that. It will promote your recipe on their search results. I want to say thanks. Get involved. You can find me at jrockowitz.com, and you can learn more about the module at drupal.org project schema.org. And schema.org spelled out. Take care. Have a good one.